Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, Objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on Objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. Hello everyone, I'm going to start today with a couple pieces of news. First of all, a couple days ago I did a live stream with Raka, or rather he had me on his live stream while he was playing Commander Keen, and I think that ended up being 7 hours long, and I don't know if that's up right now or if it will go up. I saw him say something about not being able to access it. I assume that's just YouTube processing it in some way because it's such a long video, but I don't know if that goes up. Keep an eye out for it. I will post it on my website, which is where you can go to find everything I do that is of any conceivable interest to anyone. I post all of it on the website. Patreon, I have started posting only things relevant to supporters. I used to post everything there too, but it's less of a hassle to post everything to places, and it lets people know that if they see a post there, that it's going to be relevant to them as supporters. So if you want to find out everything I do, you can just go to my website. So anyway, Rucka and I talked for a long time and answered some comments. I got progressively more tipsy, so I don't remember everything we talked about, and I seemed like we didn't address too many comments in the chat, but that could just be me not remembering due to intoxication. The other little update is that I will not be streaming for at least a couple weeks. I was about to stream yesterday, but as I was getting set up, my computer shut down and would not boot until I unplugged the graphics card from getting any power from the PSU. So my graphics card died just 2 days shy of warranty expiration, which is about $700 worth of luck. So I just have to wait for that to get replaced, wait for them to send me a new one, and then I will start streaming. But that whole plan has been a little delayed. Anyway, as for questions today, first I have a few questions I've bunched together on taxation. So some of these are from different people, but maybe some of these are the same person asking multiple questions. I can't remember. In any case, this person starts out, I was curious about the idea of taxation in objectivism. I've heard objectivists say countless times that involuntary taxation is wrong, and I agree. However, I don't understand how else a government, even confined to its legitimate roles, can be supported without some form of tax. What is an alternative to taxation that fits within the framework of objectivism? Well, one alternative is that which Ayn Rand herself identified. She had the idea of fees on contracts enforced by the government. So you would be free to create any kind of contract you wished, but if you wanted it enforced by the government, then you would have to pay the government for its services. I mean, the government provides a service, and nothing is free. If you want the service the government provides, you should pay for it. And a fee based on the wealth involved in a contract is one way of doing that. Now, she said specifically, this is not the only way of doing things. I'm just throwing this out there as a possibility and an example. But I think that's a really good idea. And it's not a surprise that Ayn Rand thought of it. Her off-the-cuff ideas are usually far more brilliant than everyone else's considered ideas. But she did say that is not objectivism. That's just one possibility, but it's a good possibility. That would be a great way of doing it, because it raises revenue without, one, forcing people, obviously. That's totally out. But it's also not just, here you go, donate here if you want to. No, it's a way of making it a trade, which is exactly what it should be. It's, hey, you want this government service, pay for it, and you're free to do whatever you want without the government getting involved. But if you want the government involved in precisely the way that it should be, you have to pay for it. So connecting contributions to the actual service the government provides, that is perfect, brilliant. Unless somebody can tell me a better idea, I think that is brilliant. That is the precise mechanism I would advocate. But in any case, in principle, voluntary contributions to the government, that's the alternative to taxation. Your premise here seems to be that people won't voluntarily give money to the government, but this is a false premise for many reasons. This is the kind of question people pose to objectivists, and they think this is just the strongest kind of objection possible. Objectivists cannot possibly have an answer to this. It's the nail in the coffin. This is their gotcha. But really, this is a softball lobbed right down the center. This is so easy to answer. There are a million reasons why voluntary contributions to the government would be expected under freedom. 1, the government would be much smaller than it is right now. Now, if you think now, given how massive the government is, it takes over a third of what you create in the US anyway. You consider federal, state, and local, all government combined takes over a third of the wealth you produce. Yeah, you might have a hard time justifying that to people or persuading them to go in for something like that. But if the government only did what it's supposed to do, it would be cheap compared to what it is now. So the government would do less, it would cost less, and because it would be taking less of our money and regulating us less, people would be far wealthier. So the cost would be smaller, and they'd have so much more money to pay that cost with. On top of that, people would be far more benevolent and willing to support a government in a rational society because they'd understand what they get out of it. Think of it now. Think of how much people give to charity when they don't get anything out of it, and that's the point of charity. The whole point is you're not getting anything out of this. This is altruism. Now, people donate to charity still out of pure concern for morality when they conceptualize morality as being against their self-interest. How much more willing would people be to voluntarily donate to something if they believed in a philosophy that combined morality and selfishness? I mean, people are willing to be moral even when it goes against what's in their self-interest. If they understand how the government actually benefits them and that that's moral and that they should pay for what they use, if you combine morality and selfishness, all that would do is strengthen people's willingness to contribute to the government. And of course, it's not just how much the government costs, but it would be that the government only does things that are actually in your interest. It would only do legitimate things, and so you'd be fine contributing to it because you wouldn't be contributing to something that is making your life worse. You would be contributing to something that serves an invaluable function. So people talk about the free rider problem, but that's bizarre. Why do you think that would be such a big deal? I'm not saying there would be no free riders, although that problem would be mitigated, 1, by people being rational and living in a society where most people wanted to pay for what they got. I mean, people do that now. People act out of a sense of morality. So free riders are always going to be a small problem. But second, this is the beauty of the fee for contracts idea, because then you don't get the government service unless you pay it. So you're not a free rider. It's just, okay, you don't want to pay the fee, then you're not getting the government service. Now, of course, if somebody murders a free rider, the government will still go after him, the murderer, but only because that murderer is a threat to other contributors. But if somehow, in principle, you knew that something would only affect free riders, the government wouldn't bother. So anyway, just check your premises. This is something that you believe only because you have been told it repeatedly, but it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. As soon as you look at this idea, but who would pay if they weren't forced to pay? Tons of people would, and there's plenty of evidence to prove that now. So look at reality. Stop just absorbing premises other people give you. Think, check your premises. Does this actually make sense? I know this is what everybody says, that, oh, we have to have taxes because that's the price of civilization. Now, if we got rid of taxes, there'd be anarchy, nobody would pay. Well, does that actually sound plausible to you? Well, if you look at reality, you will find that that is totally implausible. The government would be so cheap and people would be so wealthy that probably not everyone would even have to pay taxes or contribute voluntarily. But that slip of the tongue actually gets into this second question. Again, not sure if this is the same person or somebody else, but this person says, something that has confused me about objectivism is the idea of voluntary taxation, he puts in quotes. How is this not a blatant contradiction? Taxation is, by definition, compulsory. Well, if what you mean by that is that funding from the government gained by force is significantly different from funding for the government gained voluntarily, so different that these things should be identified under different concepts, if that's what you mean, then I agree. However, your use of the term by definition is a red flag for rationalism. It suggests that you just, hey, the concepts are here, right? It's like leftists, hey, the wealth is here, let's spread it around. Hey, the concepts are here. They're just here. This is just what it is by definition. What does that mean? Well, if you mean that in a legitimate sense, what you mean is these things are so different that they require different labels. But whenever you say by definition, it implies that concepts are just these platonic things that you just intuit. Hey, this is just what it is by definition. We just zap the definition into our head from the platonic supernatural realm. So I suspect that the person asking this question has that kind of wrong rationalistic view of concepts. But in any case, if I strain to be generous and interpret this as meaning that taxation and voluntary contributions are so different that you shouldn't call them the same thing, then yes, I agree. But it's strange to me that you are accusing you say, something that's confused me about objectivism is the idea of voluntary taxation. Why does that confuse you about objectivism? Objectivism doesn't advocate voluntary taxation, so I don't know what you're talking about. Ayn Rand, when she discusses this, actually explicitly points this out. She says something like, oh, voluntary taxation, or to be exact, payment for government services. So she actually points this out that, technically you wouldn't call this taxation. This is so different that it can't be covered under the same concept. You shouldn't just call it voluntary taxation. It's not taxation at all. So she actually specifically points this out. So you're just not clear on what objectivism believes. You haven't actually read Ayn Rand on this. So I don't know where you're getting this idea of voluntary taxation from. Yes, some people use that term loosely, as I do, but that's just because contributions to the government is an awkward way of saying things, and we don't have a single word for contributions to the government. So voluntary taxation is just an easy way to say it. Although if you're speaking technically, then yes, you shouldn't call it taxation. You shouldn't call voluntary contributions to the government taxation, or even more specifically, you shouldn't call payment for government services taxation. But anyway, this guy goes on to say, is this just a word game to avoid calling for the abolishment of taxation? Well, is it? Has that been your experience? Because there are two ways this could go here. There's the label, and then there's what's actually going on underneath it. So, either objectivists are using the label voluntary taxation in order to mean expropriation by force by the government, and they're simply calling that voluntary taxation. One way of looking at this is that objectivists advocate expropriation but just call that voluntary. Or objectivists actually advocate voluntary contribution, voluntary payment to the government, and they're just using the term voluntary taxation. Now, your suggestion here, is this just a word game to avoid calling for the abolishment of taxation? Do objectivists avoid calling for that? I mean, even ARI, if you push them on it, they will say, no, we are against taxes. We don't believe in forced payment, in expropriation. We don't believe in forcible funding of the government. So if they say voluntary taxation, but they're actually advocating in practice, in concrete reality, no taxation, this is a bizarre accusation. I mean, you can take issue with their wording, although I don't think this is a big deal. As I say, it's just a way of being not using awkward phraseology in certain contexts. But your accusation here is not just, hey, there's conceptual confusion. You're suggesting that objectivists are actually for expropriation by the government, and we just do some, abstract game to call that voluntary. No. Even the worst objectivists I know of, who I still consider objectivists, don't advocate taxation and let's just call it voluntary, but that's what your accusation is here. So is this just a word game to avoid calling for the abolishment of taxation? No, because even objectivists who use the term voluntary taxation aren't avoiding calling for the abolishment of taxation. So no, that's not what it is. It's not a word game to avoid calling for the abolishment of taxation. Then this person goes on, regardless of what you call it, voluntary taxation or no taxation, how would this not lead to anarchy? Once it is a voluntary choice, you necessarily create a market. I could contribute to this organization or that one. How would you maintain a monopoly in a free market? Well, you don't necessarily create a market by making this a choice. What is it? You say once it is a voluntary choice, you necessarily create a market. What is it? Well, if by it you mean funding of the government, then no, that doesn't create a market. How does that create a market? Okay, the government is not going to force me to fund it. How does that create a market? What you're lumping in here, what you're package dealing here is, oh, if I have the choice to support the government or not, that's the same thing as having the choice to support competing government, quote unquote, which just means the freedom to support insurrection, militias, terrorists, whatever. You're supporting insurrection. No. It is a totally possible state of affairs for there to be a government that does not force you to support it, but that also prevents you from funding insurrection. That is a totally possible state of affairs, and in fact, that is the proper state of affairs. So no, there's no market created just because the government won't force you to pay for it. It just doesn't allow you to pay for any competing government. That's how it creates a monopoly. It doesn't allow you to fund any other government, but it doesn't force you to pay for it. Okay, and another taxation question. Again, not sure if this is from the same person or somebody else. This person says, I think this is somebody else. I just watched your video on objectivism versus libertarianism, and I have a question. I understand objectivists support a government that protects your rights. But I see that as a contradiction. If the state is an organization premised on stealing an individual's income, is that not already a violation of the individual's rights? Yes, it is, but that is not what the state is. The state is not premised on stealing an individual's income. Anyway, questioner goes on. If it's not clear already, I'll just let you know that I'm coming from an anarcho-capitalist point of view. So my question is this, is taxation a violation of property rights? And if so, how do you justify it? It is a violation of property rights, and I don't justify it. So again, libertarians just seem to be incapable of getting it through their head that the state does not require taxation. People can voluntarily fund the state. Even a monopolistic state does not require taxation. You can have a state that prevents other competing governments from popping up without forcing you to support it. There is a difference between authority and taxation. These are two different things. I don't know how many times I have to say this. This is one of the immovable puzzle pieces. From the time I realized that I was going to make what used to be the essay collection I'm writing, a book about objectivist positions people don't understand, and even objectivists always get wrong. This was one of the topics I knew was going in there. Authority versus taxation. No one seems to understand this, and it is crucial. Authority is not the same thing as taxation. The government can have the authority the monopolistic authority and ability to enforce its rules in a geographic area without forcing people to fund its existence. Those are two different things. And as long as you think of them as the same thing, you are going to be either a statist or an anarchist, although in the end, those are the same thing. I know libertarians and anarchists hate hearing that, but it is true. Wow. Well, I intended to deal with more questions than just this today, but I think I've already gone on a little longer than usual, so I will just save this question about conspiracy theories for next time, because I expect my answer to that will be as substantial as it was to this one. So you can look forward to conspiracy theories next time. I'm going to dig into that topic from a philosophical perspective. So I will see you next time. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.